"Just get back in your truck. No one helps people for free anymore," the driver behind shouted. But the man still stopped his fully loaded truck, stepped out into the pouring rain, and bent down to shelter a mother and her 2 children huddled by the roadside with his umbrella. He didn't know that action would be silently repaid the next morning, when hundreds of Marines stood at attention along the entire highway. Type respect if you believe quiet kindness is always witnessed by someone. Raymond Ray Decker, 58, was a long-haul truck driver, a Marine Corps veteran who had served from Desert Storm to the battlefields of Iraq. Though discharged over 20 years ago, he lived alone, driving across the state with contracts to deliver goods to supermarkets. On Interstate 25, between Santa Fe and Las Vegas, New Mexico, he spotted an old SUV parked on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking. Nearby, a young woman and 2 children were sheltering from the rain under a thin jacket. Without hesitation, Ray stopped his truck, pulled the handbrake, and stepped down. The mother, Melissa Grady, 33, clutched her children fearfully when she saw the tall, bearded man approaching. But Ray simply removed his rain jacket, covered the 2 small children, and said, "It's all right. I was a Marine. I don't leave anyone behind." Melissa broke down in tears. Her car had stalled. Her phone was nearly dead. She was on her way to visit her sick father with her children. Ray called the nearest station for a tow truck, but the road was deserted and no one would come this late. He decided to move all the cargo in his cabin to the back compartment, offering the cabin to the mother and children to stay warm, then towed their car using his cargo straps. It took him 3 hours to travel a distance that normally took 40 minutes, as he had to maintain a low speed to keep the car behind from veering off. When they finally reached a rest stop, Ray refused payment and wouldn't let Melissa take his number, simply saying, "If your kids grow up to be good people, that's payment enough for me." The rain had intensified during their slow journey, drumming against the truck's metal roof. Inside the warm cabin, Melissa's children, a boy of 7 and a girl of 5, had fallen asleep, their small heads resting against her shoulders. Ray had offered them his dinner, sandwiches he'd packed that morning, and thermoses of hot soup. He'd eaten nothing himself, just quietly driven while occasionally checking the rearview mirror to ensure the towed SUV remained stable. At one point, a highway patrol car had slowed beside them, lights flashing. The officer initially looked suspicious until Ray briefly explained the situation. The patrolman had nodded respectfully and even offered an escort, which Ray politely declined. "Been doing this for 30 years, he'd said. "Got it under control." The rest stop was a welcome sight, lights glowing through the rain like a lighthouse. The small diner was closing, but the overnight attendant recognized Ray from his regular routes and kept the coffee pot on for them. While Melissa called her father from the payphone, Ray inspected her vehicle. The alternator had failed completely, not something he could fix with roadside tools. "I know a mechanic who opens early," he told her. "Good man, fair prices. I'll leave his information with you." When Melissa insisted on at least paying for the tow, Ray shook his head. "Got 3 hours to spare and strong straps. Didn't cost me a thing except time." She noticed the Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm when he rolled up his sleeves to check under her hood. Faded but still distinct, the eagle, globe, and anchor partially visible beneath years of sun exposure. "My brother was in the Marine," she said. "He didn't come home." Ray's eyes met hers for a brief moment. "Then I'm helping him too," he said quietly. As he prepared to leave, Melissa quickly took a photo of Ray returning to his truck, just his silhouette against the illuminated cabin. A simple image that would soon mean much more than she realized. Melissa shared the story on social media with a photo of the warmly lit cabin. "He didn't ask who I was, but he's the reason my children are sleeping safely tonight." The post attracted hundreds of thousands of shares, with the hashtag #RealHeroInTruck. A fellow veteran recognized the man, that Staff Sergeant Decker, callsign Ghostback, the one who single-handedly held the supply line during the Ramadi attack. Public interest spread. The Department of Defense unexpectedly sent an email of gratitude, but Ray never responded. He just continued driving, still unaware he had become an internet hero. Meanwhile, Captain Jacob Monroe, Ray's former commanding officer, now stationed at Fort Bliss, read about the story. Monroe remembered, "Ray once said, 'Don't honor me. Honor the kids I couldn't save in time.'" But Monroe knew This time, Ray couldn't quietly withdraw. He made a plan, sending messages to all veterans and active duty Marines in the surrounding area, setting a meeting for 6 a.m. the next day on Interstate 25. The viral post had gained momentum overnight, gathering comments from people across the country. Among them were veterans who shared their own stories of Ray Decker, accounts that had never made official records but lived in the memories of those he'd served with. A former combat medic wrote about how Ray had carried 3 wounded men to safety under heavy fire after their convoy was hit by an IED. A retired communications officer described how Ray had jury-rigged a radio system when their equipment failed, maintaining critical contact during a sandstorm that had stranded their unit. These stories painted a picture of a man who had never sought recognition, who had in fact actively avoided it. When recommended for commendations, he would disappear before ceremonies. When journalists wanted interviews after particularly successful missions, he would volunteer for patrols that took him far from base. Captain Monroe had been trying to track Ray down for years. After discharge, Ray had effectively vanished from military circles. No reunions, no veterans events, no digital footprint. The truck driving job kept him moving, never settling long enough to be found. The viral post was the first confirmed sighting in over a decade. As messages flew between veterans groups, the plan came together with military precision. Marines currently stationed at bases within driving distance requested special morning permissions. Veterans called in sick to work or rearranged schedules. Even those who had never met Ray but knew his reputation made arrangements to be there. Monroe coordinated it all from his office at Fort Bliss, working through the night. His wife brought him coffee as he plotted positions on maps, assigned meeting points, and ensured everything would be in place before Ray's truck would pass through. "Why is this so important to you?" she asked. Monroe looked up from his papers, his eyes tired but determined. "Because in our darkest moments, Ray showed us what it meant to be human. Not just a Marine, but a human being. And now, when he thinks no one is watching, he's still doing it." By midnight, the plan was set. Over 1,000 people had confirmed their participation. The Highway Patrol had been discreetly notified, not to provide assistance, but simply to be aware that the gathering wasn't a security concern. At 4 a.m., vehicles began moving toward the designated stretch of Interstate 25. By 5 a.m., Marines and veterans were taking their positions, spaced at precise 20-meter intervals. They came in all ages, from recently enlisted to Vietnam-era veterans, some traveling from neighboring states. They stood in perfect formation, waiting in the pre-dawn darkness, unified by a single purpose. Kindness doesn't need repayment, but gratitude shouldn't be silent. Type tribute if you agree that a good person shouldn't disappear as if they never existed. Ray woke early, preparing to leave the rest stop to complete the final leg of his journey. As his truck merged onto Interstate 25, he began noticing uniformed Marines standing on both sides of the road, evenly spaced every 20 meters. Each Marine stood at attention, saluting, eyes fixed directly on his truck. Ray thought it must be a farewell ceremony for someone else, until he saw a small handwritten sign posted by the roadside. For Staff Sergeant Raymond Decker, thank you for not leaving anyone behind. He began to slow down, but the line of people didn't end. Over 1,000 Marines and veterans lined 8 miles of highway. From inside the cabin, he was speechless. No one approached the truck. No one raised a phone. Just thousands of grateful eyes. When he reached the end of the route, a group of young Marines stood in formation. Captain Monroe stepped forward, raising his hand in salute. "I once served under you. Today we just wanted to say, we see you, and we remember." Ray didn't exit his truck. He simply placed his hand over his heart, bowed his head deeply, then quietly drove on. No media present, no banners. But everyone there recounted it was the quietest morning and the most beautiful in their military lives. The dawn light broke over the mountains as Ray's truck approached the first Marine. The air was crisp, the sky painted in shades of amber and gold that illuminated the desert landscape. In this soft light, each uniformed figure stood like a sentinel, perfectly still, perfectly aligned, a living monument stretching into the distance. Ray's hands tightened on the steering wheel when he saw the first salute. His weathered face, usually impassive after years of solitary driving, registered shock, then recognition, then something deeper, a profound emotion that made his jaw tighten and his eyes glisten. He maintained a steady speed, not too slow, not too fast. Professional even in his surprise. The highway patrol had blocked civilian traffic for these few minutes, allowing this moment to unfold without interruption. The Marines represented every generation of service. Gray-haired veterans from Vietnam stood alongside fresh-faced recruits who had just earned their Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. Women Marines stood with the same perfect posture as their male counterparts. Some wore dress blues, others service uniforms. Whatever they had available, worn with impeccable precision. What struck Ray most was the silence. No cheers, no applause, no shouts. Just the disciplined quiet of Marines rendering honors. The only sound the rumble of his truck's engine and the whisper of the desert wind. Among them were men he'd served with directly. Faces older now but still recognizable. His radio man from the second Iraq tour. A sniper he'd pulled from a burning Humvee. The cook who'd saved extra rations for Ray's team when they returned from long patrols. A mile in, Ray spotted a woman in uniform standing slightly apart. Captain Sarah Winters, now in her 40s, who had been a young lieutenant when Ray saved her platoon by finding a safe route through enemy territory. She held her salute with the others, but her free hand rested on the shoulder of a teenage boy beside her. Her son, born after Ray had already left the service. 3 miles along, the formation included not just Marines but other service members too. Army, Navy, Air Force, standing slightly behind the Marines but present nevertheless. Word had spread beyond branch boundaries. At mile 5, Ray passed a section where veterans unable to stand had come in wheelchairs, each one assisted by a standing Marine who helped them hold their salutes. Near the end of the lineup, where Captain Monroe waited, a small group of civilians stood respectfully behind the Marines. Families of those who had served with Ray, including some whose loved ones had not returned. When Ray finally reached Monroe, the road ahead was clear, the formation complete. No speeches were necessary. The message had been delivered with Marine Corps' efficiency, clear, purposeful, undeniable. As Ray's truck moved beyond the last Marine, slowly accelerating back to highway speed, he adjusted his mirror to see the formation begin to disperse. Some Marines embraced. Others stood a moment longer, watching his truck disappear toward the horizon. In that mirror, Ray saw not just the Marines but reflections of decades. Missions completed, lives saved, sacrifices made, and most importantly, a code lived by long after the uniform was put away. After that morning, Ray continued his journey. But when he returned to the old rest stop for truck maintenance, the shop owner handed him a small wooden box. Inside was a special license plate with the Marine Corps emblem, engraved with his name and the phrase, "The Highway Remembers." They asked permission to hang his photo on the shop's wall, next to a picture of their father, who had also been a Marine. Melissa quietly sent a letter to Fort Bliss, requesting enrollment in the Veteran Family Support Program. In her letter, she wrote, "If my children grow up to be grateful, it's because a man stopped his truck on the highway, leaving no one behind." Ray, he kept driving, still didn't use social media, but whenever he passed through I-25, he flashed his headlights 3 times. And if he was lucky, he might see a young Marine salute back, though no one knew exactly why. The wooden box traveled with Ray in his truck, tucked safely behind the driver's seat. He never displayed the special plate, but sometimes at night in motel rooms, he would open the box and run his fingers over the engraving. The shop that had given him the plate became something of an unofficial Marine gathering point. Veterans passing through would stop to look at Ray's photo, sometimes leaving challenge coins or unit patches beside it. The owner, himself the son of a Marine, kept everything in a display case that grew more crowded each month. Melissa's children eventually received college scholarships through the Veteran Support Program she had joined. Her son chose to study engineering, inspired by how Ray had rigged the towing system that rainy night. When asked about career plans in his application essay, he wrote about wanting to design emergency response vehicles. In truck stops across the Southwest, drivers began sharing rumors of the Marines Mile, a stretch of Interstate 25 where, occasionally, Marines would appear without explanation to salute passing trucks. Some thought it was training, others dismissed it as urban legend. But veteran drivers knew. They watched for it. And some, like Ray, flash their lights 3 times when passing through. A signal, a remembrance, a thank you. Some people don't need elaborate funerals. They just need one acknowledging look. I see you, and I owe you something. Subscribe to TT Hero Stories if you believe one kind act on the road can create something magnificent. TT Hero Stories, because some heroes never stop serving.